Somewhere beneath the peaks of the North Caucasus in Russia, explorers stumbled upon a prehistoric underground megastructure that carries no official name. Near the top of one of those mountains, a narrow opening plunges straight down into solid rock. The interior walls are cut completely smooth, set at precise angles, and lined all the way down with enormous fitted stone blocks that seem far too massive to have any reasonable explanation for being there. The drop is greater than a 30-story building stood on its head underground. Hardly anyone outside of Russia even knows it exists. No university has ever surveyed it. No institution has ever attempted to date it. It is a remarkable and puzzling mystery, one that absolutely deserves far greater and far more serious attention. The only individuals who ever ventured inside brought rope and cameras with them. What they encountered down there matches nothing in any cave ever documented anywhere on Earth. The man who first discovered it held no academic title, and he was not out searching for a cave. His name was Arthur Jamukov, a Russian speleologist whose work revolves around studying and exploring cave systems. But Yamukov stood apart from most others in his profession. Where fellow researchers tended to treat local folklore as mere entertainment, he approached it as genuine evidence. For years, he had been carefully cross-referencing ancient Balkar oral traditions, stories handed down across generations, describing enormous underground cities and hidden tunnel networks beneath the Caucasus peaks, alongside wartime documents from the Second World War. That investigative trail eventually led him straight to the Kahora shaft. In 2011, after years of persistent searching, he secured himself with rope and descended inside. The shaft opens into the mountain at Kahora Peak, located in the Kabardino-Balkaria Republic of the Russian Federation. Jamukov and his team made their way down slowly and carefully, moving shoulder-width apart against the perfectly smooth stone walls, breathing air that grew noticeably colder with every meter they dropped. The descent lasted well over an hour. The sheer vertical depth demanded complete focus, since the narrow passage left virtually no margin for any kind of error. Then, without any warning at all, the confined shaft suddenly opened wide. The entire team came to a complete stop. Stretching out before them was an immense subterranean chamber, its ceiling soaring 36 meters above their heads, roughly the height of a 12-story building, suspended inside solid mountain rock. The walls were far from raw stone. They were covered in massive rectangular blocks, each one placed against the next with joints so precise they were nearly invisible in the glow of the lamps. Certain blocks appeared to stand upright like pillars, as though the whole thing had been intentionally designed to bear the weight of the ceiling overhead. Corridors branched away from the chamber in all directions. Some were so narrow a small child couldn't have pushed through. Some would barely allow an adult hand inside. Jamukov and his companions directed their lamps into those openings, and the light simply kept going without ever bouncing back. And there was one more thing. While standing in that hall, the team sensed it before they could quite put it into words. A slow and steady flow of cool air drifting upward past them from somewhere far below. Not a breeze coming down from the entrance above, something rising from the depths. Which meant that wherever they happened to be standing was not the lowest point. This ancient subterranean structure they had just stepped into reached further down than any rope or beam of light could follow. So why does the sheer scale of this place pose such a serious question? It all begins with the blocks themselves, because everything else stems from that. The researchers who took measurements of the stones lining this shaft estimated that the largest among them could weigh as much as 200 tons. That figure deserves a moment of quiet reflection. And here's why. There's a useful comparison most people are already familiar with. The granite ceiling beams inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza, widely regarded as among the most extraordinary construction achievements of the ancient world, weigh roughly 80 tons apiece. The stones fitted into this mountain are more than double that. They rest deep underground, inside a shaft near the summit of an isolated Caucasus peak, with no quarry nearby, no ramp, no road, and absolutely no indication of how they were ever brought into position. To move even a single one of those stones today, you would require a heavy-duty crane specifically engineered for the job, and there is no flat surface at that peak to position one on. The easy answer is to wave it off and say ancient peoples simply manage these sorts of things. But that word simply is carrying a lot of hidden weight. It covers over everything we genuinely cannot explain. Consider Baalbek in Lebanon, because Baalbek stands as evidence that these massive figures are no exaggeration. 3 colossal cut stones temples, known as the trilithons, rest beneath the remains of the Roman Temple of Jupiter. Each one stretches over 19 meters in length and tips the scales at roughly 900 metric tons, around 10 times heavier than the largest blocks used in the Great Pyramid, and about 36 times the weight of the stones at Stonehenge. They were carried from a quarry more than half a mile distant and lifted to a height of 9 meters, placed atop other blocks weighing 400 tons each. The Romans, who kept detailed records of virtually every major building project they ever carried out, left absolutely nothing behind explaining how this was accomplished. What is more, the trilithon blocks do not even feature the Lewis holes that Roman engineers typically carved into stone before raising it. Whatever force positioned those blocks, it was not conventional Roman construction practice. The quarry at Baalbek only deepens the mystery. Still embedded in the earth nearby lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single unfinished monolith, roughly 68 meters long and weighing upward of 1,200 tons. In 2014, a team from the German Archaeological Institute dug further into the site and uncovered something even more staggering directly underneath it, a block now referred to as the Forgotten Stone, with an estimated weight of 1,650 tons. It holds the record as the largest quarried stone block ever documented anywhere on Earth. It has never been shifted from its place. Nobody has ever managed to account for how it was ever meant to be transported, so the 200-ton blocks found in the Caracol shaft do not seem so extraordinary on their own. Baalbek has already demonstrated that human hands accomplish far more remarkable feats at some point in our distant past. What all of this demonstrates, when considered as a whole, is that the method has disappeared entirely. Whether it was a technology that faded away, a technique that was simply forgotten, or knowledge that was never recorded to begin with, the understanding of how these stones were transported no longer exists. And once you come to terms with the fact that the weight was manageable and the method is gone, the question shifts away from engineering altogether. It becomes something far stranger. Why would anyone go through this kind of effort deep within a mountain for a structure that no human being was apparently ever intended to pass through? The absence of any human trace. The question of purpose should have come with obvious answers. Every constructed space that humans have ever made leaves behind a kind of signature, a mark of what it was actually used for. A burial chamber holds the departed. A place of worship holds smoke, ritual surfaces, and prayers etched into stone. A mine holds the wounds of extraction and the remnants of everything that was carried out. These are the ways archaeologists genuinely read a space and pieced together what once took place inside it. The Cahora shaft holds none of that. There were no stairs, no ladders, no footholds carved into the rock. Without modern rope, there is simply no way of moving through the shaft at all, which means whoever constructed this place had no means of returning to it, at least not by way of the route that currently exists. A structure you are able to build but cannot enter is not really a building in any sense most people would understand. There was also no soot present on the walls. This particular detail grows significant once you consider that people venturing underground always bring fire with them. Torches and oil lamps leave their dark signature across stone surfaces, and that signature endures for thousands upon thousands of years. The absence of soot is essentially a record of the absence of fire. Whatever took place inside this shaft, it unfolded without any source of light, or it occurred before any human hand ever raised a torch within it. There were no inscriptions, no carved markings, no offerings left behind, no pottery, no remains, no evidence of human presence whatsoever. So the passages remain too narrow to enter. The grand hall stretches upward with its 36-meter ceiling, and the precisely fitted stone blocks sit in complete silence. Vadim Chernobro, who headed the Cosmopoloesque research group and charted the rope-accessible sections of the shaft, observed that this structure shared particular characteristics with the unexplained shafts found inside Egyptian pyramids. Those deep passages running beneath the pyramid complex and opening into chambers with no identifiable function also carry no burn marks on their walls, no hieroglyphs, no artifacts, no signs of human presence or ceremonial activity, and no realistic way for a person to navigate them without tools that simply did not exist back then. Chernobro's conclusion was that both of these structures were designed for something that had nothing to do with human movement, transportation, ritual practice, or storage. Then there is the matter of the air. A slow, steady current rises continuously from somewhere beneath the lowest point the team was able to reach. Air flows through a structure only when there is hollow space somewhere deep below that connects back to the surface. That consistent, cool, unbroken current suggests that everything anyone has ever seen of this prehistoric underground megastructure is at best just the entrance to something far larger. Everything below that point remains completely unexplored. Engineering with a clear and recognizable purpose is already difficult to explain when the builders are unknown. Engineering that serves no purpose anyone can identify is an entirely different kind of problem. And that is precisely why researchers have begun asking whether the mountain itself could be responsible. The possibility of a natural formation. Before anything else, this geological argument deserves to be considered at full strength because it is far from a weak one. Volcanoes genuinely do remarkable and unusual things to rock, and the mountain at Karora is volcanic in origin. The rock it is composed of is tuff, the material produced when volcanic ash, fragments, and gases fuse together under intense heat and pressure. And tuff rock has very specific fracture behavior. Even along flat, clean surfaces, it can split. It can fracture into slabs that, viewed from a distance, appear to have been cut with a saw. And in certain volcanic structures, the cooling process draws stone into tall, evenly shaped columns, so regular, in fact, that early European travelers who first came across basalt columns at places like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland were genuinely convinced they had been shaped by ancient giants. Nature, left entirely to itself, is capable of producing forms that appear purposeful. Any fair telling of this shaft's story has to begin by acknowledging that the explorers who descended into it arrived already prepared to find something like that. They carried the geological explanation with them going in, ready to put it to use. But what they encountered made that explanation impossible to apply. Volcanic rock, when it breaks apart into columns, produces shapes with 5 and 6 sides, hexagons and pentagons, the geometry of a natural cooling process. The shaft, however, is filled with right angles, the geometry of a craftsman working with timber or stone. When rock splits along a natural fracture plane, the surface tends to wander. It bows, drifts, and curves as the break moves through uneven material. The walls of the shaft, by contrast, remain parallel and true across 40 meters without any deviation. Natural fracture fields are threaded through, with cracks running in many directions at once. The explorers noted none of the diagonal fissures that appear in every known natural volcanic formation. Then there is the binding material packed into the joints between the stone blocks. The team discovered what looked to be a bonding substance, placed the same way a mason fills the seams in a wall. No volcanic process anywhere on Earth has ever been observed producing mortar and pressing it into a joint. That simply does not occur in nature. The absence of oblique cracks and the diagonal fissures that run through all solid formations, as a natural result of how rock settles, was among the observations that most clearly set this shaft apart from any natural formation on record. Every tough cave system that has ever been examined carries these fractures. Karora carries none. Combined with the right angles, the parallel walls, and the binding material, the explorers reached a conclusion that no known cave system anywhere in the world offers a comparable structure. That conclusion brings the question exactly to where it belongs. Not whether this structure was made by human hands, but who made it, when, and by what means. The civilizations that once called these mountains home. One way to dismiss a discovery is to treat it as if it stands alone, as though the thing found has no context, no relatives, no place in any broader picture. The Karora shaft gets handled this way quite often, like an anomaly, an outlier, something that exists in isolation and therefore cannot be taken seriously. But the North Caucasus is among the oldest worked landscapes anywhere on Earth, and the closer you examine the ground surrounding it, the less isolated the shaft begins to appear. Roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, a culture emerged in the northern foothills of this very same mountain range that archaeologists today refer to as the Makop. These were not simple herding communities. They worked gold, silver, and arsenic bronze. They raised enormous burial mounds above their dead. And at a site known as Zartskaya, their builders put together a stone burial chamber whose design connects directly to the dolmen tradition of the wider region. Across the Western Caucasus today, around 3,000 of those dolmens still stand, chambers of carefully dressed stone slabs fitted together at clean right angles. A number of them feature perfectly circular holes bored straight through a single solid face of rock. 5,000 years ago, the hands working in these mountains were already shaping stone with both patience and precision. Travel south across the range into Georgia, and the rock itself becomes an entire town. At Upstik, an entire community was hewn directly into a cliff face, halls, rooms, and corridors carved out of solid rock occupied since the early Iron Age roughly 3,000 years back, and continuously inhabited for centuries beyond that. Within the same republic that holds Karora, a steep gorge shelters a cluster of medieval stone burial structures that locals refer to as the City of the Dead. Far more recent than the rest, yet telling all the same. For age upon age, the mountain people here have responded to their landscape through stone. Then comes the harder question of just how far genuine skill can stretch back through time. For that answer, look southward toward the highlands of Anatolia. At Gobese and the neighboring site of Karahantepe, roaming hunters and gatherers raised enormous carved stone pillars more than 11,000 years ago, the oldest structures of their kind anywhere on Earth, erected thousands of years before the first city appeared, before the wheel turned, before a single written word existed anywhere. Archaeologists are still drawing them out of the ground. As recently as 2023, digs at Kahantepe brought to light a carved human figure standing over 2 meters tall. A generation prior, every standard textbook agreed that nobody at that stage of human development could have constructed such things. The stones themselves said otherwise. The category of impossible for this particular era has a rather poor track record. The concept of a finished functional space concealed beneath the earth is also far from unusual in this region. In Cappadocia, Turkey, the underground city of Daringuyu descends 85 meters into the ground across 18 levels of chambers, stables, and chapels kept breathable through more than 50 concealed ventilation shafts. In China, the Longyu Caverns were shaped entirely by hand over 2,000 years ago, vast, precise, and geometrically consistent, and yet not a single surviving historical document tells us who created them or what purpose they served. On Malta, the Halaflani Hypogeum was cut 3 levels deep into solid rock, its inner rooms deliberately shaped to mirror the temples that existed above ground in the open air. None of this demands the existence of a single lost civilization stretching across the entire world. What it demands is something far simpler and in its own way far stranger, that over and over again, in places that had no knowledge of one another and no contact whatsoever, human beings descended into the ground and constructed. The Karora shaft has a family of its own. It is simply the largest and the most hushed member among them. And the part that unsettles the most is that a certain group appeared to already have knowledge of its existence well before it was officially uncovered. So why exactly were the Nazis searching for it? Arthur Jamakov did not stumble upon the shaft by chance, and the path he took to arrive there is nearly as remarkable as the shaft itself. During the Second World War, in the summer of 1942, German forces launched Operation Edelweiss, a significant military offensive into the Caucasus region aimed at seizing the oil-rich territories of the Soviet South, and in particular, the Baku oil fields located in Azerbaijan. Taking control of those resources was considered vital to the German war campaign. But mixed in among the soldiers advancing into the mountains was a very different kind of researcher pursuing a very different kind of goal. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, had established an organization known as the Ahnenerbe, officially named the Research and Teaching Society for Ancestral Heritage. Its declared purpose was the study of Aryan racial origins, but its actual activities extended far beyond that stated mission. The Ahnenerbe organized expeditions across the globe in search of evidence pointing to ancient civilizations that Nazi ideology sought to claim as Aryan forebears. In 1938 and 1939, an expedition headed by SS officer Ernst Schaefer journeyed to Tibet, officially framed as anthropological and botanical fieldwork, but carrying a concealed directive. The real aim was to look into the legends surrounding Shambhala, a mythical subterranean realm said to hold preserved ancient wisdom and sophisticated technology inherited from a civilization long since disappeared. The Nazi high command was convinced that whatever secrets Shambhala held could tip the balance of the war in their favor. The Caucasus drew the Ahnenerbe in for those very same reasons. Ancient tales from that region spoke of enormous subterranean cities raised by long-vanished civilizations, mountains, precisely the kind of evidence they were hunting for. When Operation Edelweiss pushed German forces into those mountain ranges, Ahnenerbe researchers moved right alongside them. They made their way across those slopes, leaving traces behind on the rock, and near the entrance to the Karahora shaft, carved into a boulder at the summit, sits a swastika. It was placed there by German researchers who were, by every indication, close enough to understand exactly where they stood. That alone would be remarkable. What makes it even more unsettling is that a second swastika was discovered in the very same area, older, with no link whatsoever to the Germans. It's worth noting here that the swastika ranks among the most ancient symbols in all of human history, found throughout Central Asia and the Caucasus. It appears in pre-Christian and pre-modern settings as a representation of life's cycles and natural forces, existing long before the Nazi Party ever claimed it for their own. But the fact that both markings sit in the same spot, one from antiquity, one from wartime, leaves behind a question nobody has ever managed to answer. Did the original builders of this structure place that symbol there themselves? And if they did, were the Nazis simply following a path laid down by the very same hands that shaped the stone? That is the question that drew Jemakov to this mountain in the first place. For years, he had been poring over documents and physical traces left behind by German researchers during their Caucasus campaign. Those wartime records, combined with the ancient Balar legends describing buried underground cities, pointed toward one particular location. He kept pulling on both threads until they led him to a sheer rock face with a narrow vertical opening cut into it, and the legends themselves were anything but vague. Across Kabardino-Balkaria, oral traditions had kept alive accounts of narrow vertical shafts cutting deep into the mountain rock, stone passageways far too precise to have formed naturally. There were tales of communities that once dwelled beneath the earth and left behind entire cities unseen for hundreds of years. These stories had been carried forward across countless generations, and Jemakov held firmly to the idea that oral history contains genuine geographic memory. That conviction pointed him toward the shaft, and the shaft, as it turned out, was no fiction. What those legends actually described, the legends of the North Caucasus, were not hazy tales of spirits and shadows. They were remarkably specific. Generations of Balkar and Kabardian communities had preserved these accounts, passing them along beside fires, eventually gathering them into collections of regional folklore. Most researchers who encountered them simply filed them away as mythology. A handful took them seriously enough to go looking, but those traditions mapped with striking detail onto what Jemakov had actually uncovered. The stories spoke of stone corridors with straight edges and smooth, flat walls, nothing like the rough, winding tunnels of a natural cave system. They described passageways that descended further than torchlight could reach. They conveyed a strong sense that what lay below had been constructed, not shaped by nature. None of that precision was invented in hindsight after the discovery. It had been preserved long before anyone went looking. Across the wider Caucasus region, the tradition of building beneath the ground was not purely the stuff of legend. Archaeological surveys had documented genuine subterranean sites throughout the mountains, stretching back thousands of years. The local stories stood alongside physical evidence of a culture that had truly moved underground at some point in the distant past. That broader context made it considerably easier to treat the legend as something more than folklore, as actual geographic memory. Jemakov felt certain he was standing at the very beginning of something far greater. After the early expedition work and the mapping carried out by Chernobrov's Kosmopoisk team, he spoke openly about his belief that Karahora was just one of many entrances and that the surrounding mountain range concealed additional structures, other shafts, other chambers still waiting to be discovered. He was deep into planning further trips into that region when the research came to a halt. In 2015, Arthur Jemakov was involved in a fatal collision with a vehicle. He did not survive. The day before that accident, he had reported uncovering a significant new discovery connected to the Kahora investigation, but whatever he had found vanished along with him. 2 years on, in 2017, Vadim Chernobrov, the man who had led the Kosmopoisk expeditions, charted the shaft, and produced the very first television documentary about it, also passed away from illness. He was 51 years old. 3 more individuals connected to the research into that shaft also died in the years that followed the original expeditions. These deaths are on record. What they actually mean remains genuinely uncertain. There is no confirmed indication of anything sinister in any of these cases, and it would be dishonest to label this a conspiracy without solid evidence. That said, it would be equally dishonest to suggest the timing is entirely unremarkable. What can be stated plainly is that the people most responsible for what the world knows about Cahora are no longer here. The questions they raised remain unanswered, and nobody has stepped in to continue where they left off. Theories that were never proven. The hardest reality about the Cahora shaft is that nearly every question this place raises could be resolved with just a single week of proper scientific work. A thin section of the stone wall, examined beneath a microscope, would tell a geologist definitively whether that surface was shaped by a tool or formed through natural cooling. A sample of the binding material pressed into the seams could be chemically tested in any standard laboratory, establishing within days whether it is genuine mortar or simply a mineral deposit that formed on its own. A thorough investigation of the shaft using up-to-date instruments could chart precisely how far those corridors extend, where they eventually go, and what is generating the air movement. Carbon analysis of any organic material found in the binding, should it exist, would establish a minimum construction age. Neither of these approaches is costly when measured against standard archaeological fieldwork. Neither demands tools that are unavailable, and yet neither has ever actually been carried out. The reason is straightforward. The Cahora shaft sits in a remarkably difficult-to-access spot, tucked into one of the most rugged and overlooked regions of the Russian Caucasus, and no university, archaeological institution, or government research body has ever judged the ascent to be worthwhile. Before he passed away, Vadim Chernobrov had put forward the idea that the shaft may have functioned as a resonator, a structure built to interact with sound or naturally occurring vibration in ways that are no longer understood. He also raised the notion of a seismological purpose, suggesting it could have been constructed to sense or respond to movement within the Earth, though he was open about the fact that this was speculation. Certain other investigators proposed it might serve some kind of energy-related function, a chamber fashioned to gather or direct something emanating from the Earth itself, though no one has been precise about what that process would actually involve. The most structurally daring interpretation is that Cahora represents the underground foundation of a pyramid that once rose above ground on the mountain's surface and has since been destroyed or buried, leaving only the base preserved deep within the rock while everything above it vanished long ago. This pyramid theory carries a degree of surface-level appeal. The smoothed walls, the careful block arrangement, and the dimensional resemblances to the Grand Gallery inside the Pyramid of Khufu have been pointed out on numerous occasions. Jemukov himself drew attention to this parallel. If a larger structure once existed, if it stood above the peak and has since crumbled or worn away across thousands of years, then what remains underground may well be the only surviving trace of it. Unfortunately, none of these theories can be put to the test given what currently survives. The only recent documentation of the location comes from Alexander Splashnov, a private individual who made the ascent in 2017 and 2018 and posted 2 photo albums to the Russian social platform VKontakte. His pictures represent the clearest visual record of the shaft that we have. They reveal the geometric precision of the walls, the sheer scale of the megalithic blocks, the smooth and polished surfaces, and stone formations around the entrance that appear to show additional, precisely cut blocks lying buried beneath soil and vegetation. Splashnov also captured what looked like machine-style markings on the surfaces of stones near the entrance, parallel striations of the kind that have been recorded at other prehistoric megalithic locations, including Baalbek in Lebanon and the Yangshan Quarry in China. Whether those marks represent the same phenomenon and what produced them remains unknown, but their appearance in the photographs adds yet another layer to a site that already carries far too many unanswered questions and far too little formal scrutiny. What we are left with in the end is a set of things that simply hold true. There are stones inside that mountain heavier than the ceiling of the Great Pyramid. They are joined together at right angles. That volcanic tuff does not naturally form on its own. They line a shaft that descends beyond anything a living person can reach, leading into a hall that nobody left a single trace of ever using. From that hall extend passages too narrow to enter, with a steady current of cool air rising from a darkness that no light has ever touched, and all around it rise mountains that human hands have been carving, tunneling through, and dressing for no fewer than 5,000 years. The evidence that would finally settle the matter has never been gathered. The prehistoric underground megastructure at Karahunge holds no name in any academic record. It has no entry in any formal archaeological database. Perched on a mountain summit sits an opening, a small collection of images, and a question that has lingered in the shadows for thousands upon thousands of years, patiently waiting for someone to finally decide it deserves an answer. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and check out the videos appearing on screen right now for even more incredible stories.